The night I found out, I was standing in my own kitchen in my socks. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not the words I heard, not the face I saw, just the cold tile through my socks, and the hum of the refrigerator, and the way the clock on the microwave read 11:47. Like that mattered, like the time had anything to do with it. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 of those years married to the same woman. I built a business from nothing, sold it, bought the house outright, put my son through college, watched my daughter walk across a stage in a cap and gown, while my chest felt like it was going to split open from pride. I am not a man who cries easily. I am not a man who cries easily. I am not a man who panics. I coached Little League for 11 years. I've buried both my parents. I know what hard looks like. I did not know what this looked like. Her name is Nadine. My wife. We met when I was 32 at a fundraiser dinner for the county hospital. She was wearing a green dress and laughing at something the man next to her said. And I thought, that's it. That's the woman. I walked over and introduced myself, and she shook my hand and looked me dead in the eye and said, "You got grease under your fingernail." I had been working on my truck that afternoon and missed a spot. I was embarrassed. She was grinning. We were engaged 14 months later. That's the woman I thought I knew. My son's name is Court. He's 34, works in commercial real estate, lives about 40 minutes from us. Good kid. Serious. Doesn't call enough. But when he shows up all the way. My daughter is Faye. She's 29. She's the one who got my mother's stubbornness and my father's laugh, which is a dangerous combination. And I say that with all the love in the world. About 2 years ago, Faye started dating a man named Shepard. Shep. Tall, broad-shouldered, works in logistics, always dressed like he was on his way to a job interview, even on a Sunday. First time I shook his hand, I thought, this one's rehearsed. But Faye was happy, and she's not a fool. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He proposed to her last spring. She said yes. We had a dinner at the house to celebrate. That was the first time I noticed anything. It was small. Barely worth mentioning, except that it stayed with me. We were sitting on the back porch after dinner, just me and Nadine and Shep. Faye had gone inside to get dessert. Shep said something about the property, how much land we were sitting on, whether we'd ever thought about developing it. I told him it was 1.5 acres, and we'd never thought much about it because we weren't planning on going anywhere. He nodded and smiled and said, of course. But he looked at Nadine when he said it, not at me. She looked back, just for a second. Maybe less. Faye came through the screen door with the cake and the moment passed, and I told myself I was imagining things. I was good at telling myself that. I had practice. The months that followed were busy. Wedding planning has a way of filling up every room in a house, every conversation, every Sunday, then using caterers, and whether the centerpieces should have eucalyptus or not. I didn't have strong feelings about eucalyptus, I told Nadine, and she laughed and said that was why she loved me. It felt normal. It felt like us. But I started noticing things I couldn't unfeel. Shep came over more than made sense. Not every visit was with Faye. Twice he stopped by on a weekday afternoon, once under the pretense of borrowing a tool I'd offered months before, once to drop off some papers Faye had left in his car. Both times Nadine was home. Both times I came home to find her in a better mood than she'd been when I left. I told myself she was happy about the wedding. She told me the same thing when I mentioned it, casually, not as an accusation. He's going to be family, she said. I'm allowed to like him. I said, of course. I meant it. I went to bed and lay there in the dark and felt the particular loneliness of a man who doesn't want to know what he suspects. The thing about 31 years of marriage is that you learn a person's tells. The way Nadine laughs differently when she's performing versus when something actually strikes her funny. The way she tilts her chin up slightly when she's lying and doesn't realize it. I had watched her do it with a mechanic once when the bill came back higher than the estimate, and she told him it was fine without even blinking. Chin up, 2 degrees. I started watching for it. I didn't have to wait long. It was a Tuesday in March. I'd been at the doctor for a routine check, nothing serious. Just the kind of annual appointment you make because your wife insists and you've given up arguing. I was home by 11. My truck was in the shop, so I'd taken Court's old car, which Nadine didn't recognize, in the driveway. I came in through the side door off the garage. The house was quiet. I set my keys on the hook and heard voices from down the hall. From the sitting room we almost never used because Nadine liked the den, and I liked the porch. Low voices. One of them hers. I walked toward it without thinking. The door was partly open. I stopped. I don't want to describe what I saw in more detail than this. They were not discussing logistics. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a very long time. I don't know exactly how long. My ears were ringing. The clock in the sitting room ticked. Outside, a car went past slowly, the engine rattling. My hand was on the doorframe and I couldn't feel my fingers. Then I stepped back. I walked back through the kitchen. I sat down at the table. I looked at the bowl of oranges Nadine kept on the counter because she read once that citrus smells reduce stress. I looked at the coffee maker with the last inch of morning coffee still sitting in the carafe. I looked at the framed photo on the wall above the door. The four of us, 12 years ago, at Faye's high school graduation, everyone squinting into the sun. And I waited. I waited until I heard Shep leave through the front door. I waited until Nadine's footsteps crossed the entry and started toward the kitchen. I waited until she was 3 steps in and saw me sitting there, and then I watched the color drain out of her face like water out of a tub. She said my name. I said, "How long?" She told me it wasn't what I thought. I said, "How long?" She sat down across from me. Her chin came up. 1 degree. 2. And then it fell again. And she put her face in her hands. And she told me. 14 months. 14 months. During which we had celebrated our anniversary twice. During which I had picked out a birthday gift with Faye's help. A silk scarf she'd wanted from a shop downtown. During which I had held her hand at her sister's funeral and stood next to her at the graveside and believed without question that I was her person. 14 months. I didn't raise my voice. I want to be clear about that. Not because I want credit for it, but because I know what people imagine when they hear a story like this. I did not break anything. I did not call him names. Not that afternoon. I stood up from the table and I picked up my keys and I said, "I need to go for a drive." And I left. I sat in the parking lot outside a hardware store for about an hour. I called Court. He didn't pick up. I didn't leave a message because I didn't know what the message would be. I sat and watched people push carts in and out of the store. People buying mulch and paint rollers and cabinet handles. People whose Tuesday afternoon was just a Tuesday afternoon. And I thought about how strange it was that the world kept on perfectly fine while you were being disassembled. My phone buzzed. A text from Faye. "Dad, are you okay?" She called me. I typed back, "Can we talk in person?" 20 minutes later, she pulled into the parking lot. She got into the passenger seat without a word. We sat there for a while. Then she said, "How much do you know?" I told her. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Dad, there's more." I looked at her. She was staring straight ahead through the windshield. Her jaw was set the same way her grandmother's always was when she was about to say something she didn't want to say. "How long have you known?" I asked. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. She had been carrying this for 6 weeks and coming to Sunday dinners and tasting wedding cake samples and smiling across the table at the man who was sleeping with her mother. "Why didn't you tell me?" She turned to look at me then. "Because I needed you to see it for yourself. Because if I told you, she would have denied it, and you would have wanted to believe her." She paused. "And because there's something else going on and I needed time to figure out how big it was." I said, "Tell me." So she did. It started about 3 months after she and Shep had gotten together. She had noticed him asking questions. Detailed ones, about my retirement, about the property, about how the sale of the business had been structured. She thought it was just curiosity at first. Men like Shep are always doing math in the background. But then she'd found something on his laptop one evening when he'd asked her to print a document, and she'd had to navigate to the right folder. A folder labeled with my name. Inside, copies of county property records, an appraisal of the land going back 4 years. A draft document, not from any lawyer she recognized, that appeared to be an early attempt at a power of attorney transfer. The kind you'd use if a spouse became incapacitated. The kind that would give Nadine sole authority over all joint assets. The kind that had been partially filled in already. Faye photographed everything. She'd spent the next 6 weeks quietly, carefully, learning the full shape of it. Shep had connections in property development. She'd uncovered that through his professional associations. The land behind our house, the 1.5 acres I'd told him we weren't planning on moving off, backed up against a parcel that a development company had been quietly acquiring for 2 years. A company Shep did contract work for. If that land could be added to the assemblage, the value of the whole package jumped significantly. The plan, as best Faye could piece it together, was this. Nadine would eventually petition for separation, or, if things progressed, invoke the power of attorney under the pretense of my declining health. I'm 63. I take blood pressure medication, and my left knee aches in cold weather. But I am not by any reasonable definition a man in declining health. That hadn't stopped someone from beginning to lay the groundwork for a story that said otherwise. They had found 2 emails forwarded from an account she recognized as Nadine's, discussing Dad's memory issues and his difficulty managing the finances lately. Neither of those things was true. I managed the finances. I had always managed the finances. I knew to the dollar what was in every account we owned. When she finished telling me all of this, we sat in the parking lot for another long time. A man walked out of the hardware store carrying a bag of bird feed in each hand. A cloud passed over the sun. I said, "Okay." Faye looked at me. "Okay," I said again. "Then we do this carefully. Here is what I want you to understand about my daughter. She did not come to me with half a plan. She came to me with the photographs, with the emails she'd saved, with a list she had made over 6 weeks of dates and details, and every piece of information she had gathered. She had already spoken, quietly, to a lawyer. A woman she knew through work, not anyone connected to us. She had not acted, she had waited for me. That is the kind of woman she is. I have never been more proud of her. We did not confront Nadine again that day. I went back to the house that evening, and I said that I needed some time to think, and that I wasn't leaving, and that we would talk when I was ready. Nadine was red-eyed and quiet. She did not push. I think she believed I was processing the affair, which I was, but not in the way she imagined. Over the next 3 weeks, I moved carefully. I met with my own attorney, a man I'd worked with on the business sale, someone I trusted completely. I had him review everything Faye had photographed. He confirmed what she'd suspected. Someone had made an early attempt at establishing a paper trail that would support an incapacity claim. It hadn't gone far enough to be actionable yet, but the intent was clear. I also had every joint account reviewed. No money had been moved. But there had been inquiries. One to our investment firm, one to the bank, both made by Nadine, both described as routine in her notes to the account manager. They were not routine. She had been feeling out what transfers would require and what they wouldn't. I called Court. He drove down the same night. He sat at my kitchen table. Nadine was at her book club, or somewhere she said was her book club, and he listened to everything and did not say a single word until I was done. Then he said, "What do you need me to do?" I told him. I also, very quietly, told Shep that I had been thinking about his question from the porch that night, about the land. I told him I might be open to hearing more about what he had in mind. His response came back within the hour. Enthusiastic. He suggested coffee, just the 2 of us, to talk through some ideas. We met on a Wednesday morning. I sat across the table from the man who had been in my sitting room, in my house, And I drank my coffee, and I asked him questions, and I listened to him lay out, piece by careful piece, exactly what he envisioned for that land and how he saw it unfolding. He was good at it. He'd clearly done this before. He spoke about the development opportunity, about fair market value, about how a transaction like this would benefit the family. All of you, not just you and Nadine. He said her name naturally, comfortably. He did not look away when he said it. I nodded along. I said I'd need to review the details. I said I appreciated him being direct. What I didn't say, I had put a voice recorder in my breast pocket before I left the house. The recording was clean. Every word. On the Saturday before Easter, Faye and I had planned a family dinner. Court, his girlfriend, Faye, a few of Nadine's relatives who had nothing to do with any of this and deserved to be treated normally. Shep was invited. We had told him it was casual. He showed up in a blazer. We ate. The conversation was ordinary. After dinner, Court and Shep went to the backyard with their drinks, which I had arranged on the pretense that Court wanted to see where the property line ran. While they were out there, Faye kept Nadine busy in the kitchen. I made a phone call from my home office. When everyone was back inside and settled, I walked into the living room and I said calmly that there were a few things I needed to address before we went any further with the wedding planning. Nadine looked at me. Something moved across her face. Not guilt, exactly. Calculation. I set my phone on the coffee table. I told them that I had become aware of a plan to establish a false record of my mental and financial incompetence. I told them I had reviewed every account, every document, every email that had been photographed. I told them I had a recording of a conversation in which the real purpose of the land transaction had been made clear. I told them that my attorney had already received copies of all of it. The room was very quiet. Shep put his glass down slowly. I looked at him and I said, "You picked the wrong family." What followed was not dramatic in the way people might expect. There was no shouting. Nadine started crying and then stopped crying and then stopped very straight and looked at her hands. Shep said something about misunderstandings and I let him finish, and then I said, "I have your voice on tape. We're done." He left without finishing his drink. I had already spoken to Faye about what she wanted to do, because her life was tangled up in this too. She had made her decision weeks before I made mine. She handed him the ring in a small envelope that night. She'd had it ready in her coat pocket. She said nothing when she gave it to him. She watched him take it, and she closed the door. I filed the paperwork to separate our finances the following Monday. The attorney had everything prepared. Nadine retained her own counsel, and we have not spoken much since. The property is mine. Every account is accounted for. The house sits on its acre and a half exactly as it always has, backing up against land that will not be part of someone else's development deal. That's where things stand. I tell this not because I want anyone's sympathy. I'm 63, I'm healthy, my son calls more than he used to, and my daughter comes for dinner every Sunday and brings a bottle of something decent, and we sit on the porch after we eat, and sometimes we don't talk at all, just listen to the neighborhood quiet down. I don't need anyone to feel sorry for me. I tell it because I spent a long time being the steady one, the reliable one, the man who fixed things and didn't ask for much and assumed that the people closest to him were operating in good faith. That assumption will age you faster than anything. What I know now is this: being trusting is not the same as being naive. Being patient is not the same as being weak. What I did, my daughter and I, over those weeks of careful and quiet work, that was not passivity. That was precision. I wasn't the one who had something to hide. That turned out to matter enormously. Some nights I still stand in my kitchen in my socks and look at the clock on the microwave and think about how fast a life can tilt. How many ordinary Tuesdays you can have before one of them turns out to be different. I think about the man I was before that Tuesday, and I don't feel sorry for him. He did the best he could with what he knew. But the man I am now knows more. And that, I suppose, is the whole point. I've had a lot of time to think about how all of this unfolded. Not the dramatic parts, not the recording, not the envelope with the ring, not Shep walking out the front door with his blazer and nothing else. I mean the quieter parts. The 14 months before I knew. The Tuesday morning in March, the parking lot outside the hardware store. What I keep coming back to is this. The outcome wasn't determined by what they did. It was determined by what I did after. Because here's what I've learned at 63 that I didn't fully understand at 30. Lessons accumulate. Every choice a person makes, over days and months and years, builds something. It builds a record. It builds a pattern. And eventually that pattern becomes impossible to hide. Nadine and Shep didn't get caught because I was clever. They got caught because they had spent 14 months making choices that left marks, and I finally started looking at the marks. That's the cause and effect nobody talks about. People focus on the betrayal, the confrontation, the dramatic moment at the dinner table, but the real story is in the accumulation. Every small decision they made, every email, every inquiry to the bank, every afternoon in my sitting room, added to a structure that couldn't hold weight forever. It was always going to come down. The only question was whether I'd be paying attention when it did. Faye paid attention. That's what I think about most. My daughter, 29 years old, sitting on a secret for 6 weeks, because she had the discipline and the intelligence to know that a reaction without a plan is just noise. She didn't come to me with anger. She came to me with photographs and dates and a list. She understood, in a way I hadn't yet, that the most powerful thing you can do when someone underestimates you is let them keep underestimating you while you get your affairs in order. I think about what it cost her to do that, to sit across from Shep at family dinners, to smile, to keep her voice steady. That is not luck. That is character built over years, quietly, without anyone handing her a prize for it. I take no credit for that. She made herself who she is, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't mean everything to me. What this whole experience did more than anything was clarify what I value. Not the property, not the accounts, not the outcome in the legal sense. I value the kind of person who, when the situation asks them to panic, chooses to think instead. Who, when someone treats them like a fool, does not perform outrage but gets very calm and very precise. Court drove down that same night without asking why. They had already been 3 steps ahead for 6 weeks. Those 2 people, that's what I spent 30-odd years building a life to protect, and they turned out to be the ones protecting me. The hardest thing to admit is that being a decent, steady, trusting person made me a target. But I've made my peace with that. Because the alternative, becoming someone who trusts nothing and suspects everyone, would have hollowed me out long before any of this happened. The answer isn't to stop being trustworthy. The answer is to stop confusing trust with inattention. Pay attention. Build something real. And when someone shows you who they are through their choices, believe them. Then act accordingly and do it quietly. That's everything I know.